Accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone, online as well as in person. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the blind blogger Maxwell Ivy, and this is another episode of the Accessibility Advantage. And yes, we're having tech issues yet again. I forgot to turn off one of my devices. And they all talk. They all talk. So, you can find me at the accessibilityadvantage.com, where I am advocating for more accessibility for and inclusion of people with disabilities by emphasizing the many positive benefits of inclusion. I do hope you will check out the website and the podcast, theblindblogger.com. Excuse me, theaccessibilityadvantage.com. Either website's good. Or Maxwell at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. Or on LinkedIn, my primary social media network, it's Maxwell Ivy, which is spelled IV as a Victor EY. I am available to help you make sure that your products, services, and content are accessible. So please reach out if you want to discuss that further. As for me, I am a totally blind Caucasian male. I'm 59 years old, medium length brown curly hair with some gray and some white in it, green eyes, wearing a white button down dress shirt with a black tie. My pronouns are he and him. I have only light perception from retinitis pigmentosa or RP. And so today I have another great guest with me. And, she's kind of unusual because most people that I have on the podcast or that I know personally, they got into accessibility because they were exposed to somebody in their immediate circle. But that's not Amanda's journey. So we'll hear about that in a little bit. But Amanda Mace, she is a subject matter expert on digital accessibility with over 13 years of experience in the industry. She is also a certified professional with the Australian Computer Society, or ACS. As the vice president of Grackle Docs, she is responsible for the Australasia office and spreading word about Grackle Docs and growing the brand throughout the region. She is also lead of their audit team and responsible for the manual audits of websites belonging to their clients. And as a lifelong advocate for inclusion, or for being an advocate for many years, she has seen accessibility as a shared responsibility. And I think that's something we will both have similar thoughts on. But I look forward to my conversation. You can find Amanda at grackledocs.com. Amanda, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't believe we made this work. So I'm actually I'm in Canada right now for some work meetings, and it just so because otherwise this would be quite literally 11:13 in the evening for me. So this has worked out beautifully.
Yes. Sometimes, as I've come to learn in life, things happen in their own right time, and I just happened to connect with you on LinkedIn before you were making this trip, so we could schedule a short pre-chat and the conversation itself while you're in Toronto visiting family. And by the way, I appreciate you taking so much of your time out of your time with your family to speak to me and share some of your thoughts about accessibility with my audience.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited about this.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too. We went on for more than an hour when I was supposed to only keep you for 20 minutes the other day. So why don't you start by telling people how you got into the field of accessibility? Because as I mentioned, you're kind of unique in my circle.
Yeah, it's really interesting because so many people that I know in accessibility fell into it. Not everyone, but so many. And I'm a bit of the same. I kind of fell into it. So long story short, my best friend's mom was studying digital accessibility in university as part of her PhD, and I don't know. I was having a glass of wine and having a bit of a whinge one day about how I was when my children were really young, babies, and I really wanted to go back to work, but I really wanted to be at home with them. And my best friend said, my mom just started this company. You could work from home. At the time, it was just casual hours, so I could be with my kids and be really present with them when they were little. And I sort of said, well, what is it? And she said digital accessibility, and I had no idea what that was. But I interviewed for it, and I remember, that person was Dr. Vivian Conway, who I owe my career to, a wonderful mentor who really took me under her wing and taught me so much, gave me so many opportunities. And in lots of ways, I remember sitting down, my first meeting with her, and I knew nothing. I knew nothing about digital accessibility. And she said to me, have you ever thought about how a blind person would use social media? And at the time it was like Facebook was a big thing, how they would use like Facebook. And I, honest to goodness, I was like, a blind person can use a computer. I really had no idea. I didn't have anyone with low vision, or anyone who was blind in my inner circle. And I really had never thought about it. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was, I didn't know. I was quite ignorant. So I remember going home that day and tabbing my way through Facebook and thinking, this is horrendous. I would never want to use Facebook with just a keyboard. And that was before I even opened a screen reader for the first time. So I often tell people, like, if you don't have that experience, this is going to be quite shocking for you.
Launched in the background.
I'm sorry, just keep going.
Yeah, so basically it started there with me tabbing my way through Facebook. And here I am 13 years later. I can't believe it's been 13 years. I've had so many great opportunities. And my basic motto is, say yes and figure out how to do it if you need to. But it's easy to be passionate about accessibility. How could you not be? Like, it's... every day I get to go to work and make the world a little bit better. That's hard not to be passionate about that.
I totally agree with you on that. It is important to think about all the people whose lives you can benefit just by improving even one website in the course of one day.
Absolutely.
And as far as navigating Facebook, I've been online long enough to remember navigating my MySpace. So,
oh, goodness. I can't imagine that was pretty. I'm going to be honest.
No, it was not fun. It was not fun, but I had the benefit of some great friends on there. And so at that time I was focused on selling other people's used amusement equipment, and people would take my information and put it on their MySpace pages and try to help me make connections and sell some rides. And it's actually how I got my first ever sale, was somebody on MySpace helping me out. But yeah, Facebook. And one of the things I learned about social media the longer I do it is that sighted people and people who don't have any of the other disabilities, they're just as frustrated and aggravated by Facebook and its constantly changing formats as I am.
100%. And look, it goes back to conversations about usability, right? Yeah. And what might be an impasse for someone else is an inconvenience for another person, but it's still just poor user experience. So one of the things, accessibility isn't really a subset of UX, but it is related. And when we think about user experience as a broader thing, making it more usable, making great experiences are actually the core of what we're doing. How do we make this a great experience? That should be how we start every conversation.
Right. And how do we make it a great experience for the largest number of people as possible, given the available technology?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the Microsoft Design Toolkit, right? Which I think that came out in 2017 or 2016. I can't remember, but it's almost 10 years old now. But the concept there of solve for one, extend to many, that concept of inclusive design and finding a solution for one barrier, it may be a permanent barrier, but then you also have solutions for all of the other people who are experiencing temporary barriers in that particular scenario, or situational barriers. So I know when we spoke last week, we talked about, I think I mentioned that there was a study that said that 85% of Facebook users watch videos with captions on. However, 85% of Facebook users are not deaf. They're not hard of hearing. They just are in sound sensitive environments, or maybe, I don't know, they were at a loud concert and they can't quite hear out of one ear. There's all sorts of, personally, I don't watch videos without captions on because my sound's never on. Frequently, because when I'm watching reels in bed, often my husband's already asleep. So I don't want him to hear it. So I need the captions or else I flick on by. And that's kind of that concept is that everyone benefits. And when everyone benefits, we have a better experience for absolutely everyone. Reaching more people. Who doesn't want to reach more people with our content?
Right. One of my favorite examples in that area, because I am almost totally blind, is I like how color inversion has now become dark mode and has been embraced by a very large percentage of the developers on the web, because they found out that people who are sighted enjoy being able to have a white or a lighter colored text on a darker colored background.
Absolutely. And there are so many great examples of this. I often refer to like accessibility can lead to innovation. So if we think of things like your screen reader software, well, when I'm in the car, I'm also not allowed to look at my phone. So I have my messages read out to me, right? That's screen reader technology. The basis of that is the innovation built from accessibility. Same with voice activation software. We have had decades where people could talk to their computers to make it work with things like Dragon Naturally Speaking. But nowadays, that's also super convenient when we're talking to our phones or we're talking to Alexa or we now have these amazing devices that are utilizing that innovation, which helped people with disabilities be able to break down barriers. Well, now it's also breaking down barriers for people who don't identify as having a disability. And therefore we're seeing, hopefully over time, especially, we're going to see better, more robust digital assets being built because that's what's going to be.
Right. For my visually impaired friends that are old enough to remember this, in the beginning we had Trekker, which was a GPS technology that was combined with speech output that would allow the visually impaired to navigate streets. Of course, back then we didn't have the internet we have now, so you had to regularly update it from home and depend that the maps you were carrying around with you were still accurate. But that was the
beginning of disastrous consequences.
I'm sorry, what?
I said that could have had disastrous consequences.
It probably did. We just probably don't have the stories around it. But, and as far as a lot of the audio stuff we have now, I like to remember that when Steve Jobs started embedding accessibility in his products, which started with the Nano 4 iPod, he wasn't thinking people with disabilities. He was thinking an aging population that would need some of the same things that people who are disabled need. And he felt like he was going to seize a market before anybody else got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fair point because we do have an aging population. We are living longer than ever. And the population continues to grow globally as well. So there are more people. We are living longer than ever. My husband's grandfather only recently passed at 100 years old.
Wow.
Imagine the world that he saw evolve from 1925 to 2025.
Yes, we could use a lot more people around today who remember 1925 to 2025.
Absolutely. He had some stories to tell, that's for sure.
That reminds me, off topic here, y'all, that when I was in college, I was given an assignment to go out and interview one of my grandparents. And I wish I still had that cassette tape, to show you how long ago that's been. But you touched on something a few minutes ago that's important. You said you used the word identify as in conjunction with disability. So why don't you talk a little bit about identifying the fact that when it comes to recognizing how many people need accessibility, a lot of it comes down to whether or not people are willing to identify and how that affects the raw numbers.
Yeah, it's super important. So I think generally most people go, 1.3 billion people in the world, about 1 in 5. Some statistics come back 1 in 6. Depending where you live in the world, it's 1 in 4. So we have all these broad statistics that talk about people with disabilities, right? Those numbers, though, are generally taken off of census numbers. So those numbers are, and we had this just a couple of years ago in Australia. We had our census. I was the person in my household who did that. If you knew my husband, paperwork goes to me. I do it, and I'm filling out the census. And the questions about disability were really interesting, right? So the questions about disability were things that related to how much help, essentially, or sort of help you needed, sort of in the home. To do with your employment or with your education. So, or if you had, like, if you were blind or if you were in a wheelchair. So it wasn't talking about the person who doesn't identify as having a disability, but absolutely is affected by the way that they absorb content or they use content. So, for example, up until a couple of years ago, my mother-in-law stayed with us for a couple of years, and she has a shaky hand. Now, she does not identify as having a disability. Just as she's gotten older, her hand shakes a bit. And that means that she really struggles with a trackpad or a mouse. Because her hand shakes too much, she can't click on those buttons, especially when they're really small. So she prefers to use the keyboard. So me, the accessibility person, went, here's all the things you can do with just the keyboard, provided that website's quote, is actually made properly. Here's the keyboard that you can utilize. It also doesn't account for, so one of my husband's best friends is dyslexic, quite severely dyslexic. It doesn't account for anyone with dyslexia. So I don't know the numbers in America or even in Canada, to be fair, but I know the numbers in Australia are 2 million Australians with dyslexia who are diagnosed with dyslexia, let alone the ones who suspect but can't afford to go and get a diagnosis, or, left school not knowing they were dyslexic, but now are pretty sure. So we know.
Or even the ones who know they're dyslexic but don't want to admit that they're dyslexic to their employer or to the survey.
Absolutely. So, but colorblindness, 1 in 10 men are colorblind, 1 in 2 women. These are things that people in a census would never say that it's a disability, right? It's just not the way that we think of those particular barriers. But the way that they are accessing our digital content, the way they're accessing our world, is affected by those barriers. That's not a bad thing, but our job now is to go, I identify the barrier and remove the barrier as best we can, if not completely, right? So it's actually about going, well, how many people are actually affected by inaccessible products? And it's definitely way more than the 1 in 5. Because we've just determined that we haven't included anyone with color blindness or dyslexia or neurodiversity, or, there's a range of things. Someone who's hard of hearing, someone with a little shake to their hand. So unless you're identifying as having a disability, you're not counted in those numbers, which means we're missing a huge amount of people who are being affected, and they may or may not understand that. Like, it may just come out as frustration, right?
Right.
Do this thing. So I had an experience when I was applying for my home loan several years ago, where I was filling out, they had given me a PDF to fill out some basic details. And as I was filling that out, I was tabbing to each individual field, not because I have a disability and I require the keyboard, but because I'm lazy and I didn't want to reach for my mouse. and no word of a lie, it skipped like 3 pages and went down towards the bottom of it. Had I not realized that, because I visually saw the PDF scroll down to another page, I may have tried to submit that to a bank without all of the information. Right? So right away you go, that's really annoying for me. I have to scroll all the way back up. I can see that it moved. But if I'm someone who is blind, or maybe has mobility impairment, or maybe just didn't register that skipped several pages to go to another input field because it wasn't tagged properly, then suddenly that becomes not just an inconvenience, that's a real barrier, and potentially has an impact on whether I get that home loan or not.
Right. So it could have been a barrier to somebody getting the home loan, and getting a home loan is a very important step in future financial management. A lot of people, if they cannot purchase a home, if there are those sorts of barriers based on access to purchasing a home, it may affect their ability to build up assets over the course of their life, or possibly affect the financial futures of their children as a result. And somebody may see that it's just an inaccessible form, but really it's blocking their access to a very important part of everyday life for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk all the time in the industry about how this is about human rights. right? This is about it's about dignity and respect. And just in Australia, we have this concept of everyone should have a fair go. It's about everyone getting a fair go. That is accessibility in a nutshell.
I like that expression, and I'm very impressed with what I've heard about Australia and accessibility and disability so far. From what you were telling me about the census, it sounded like they wanted to not just determine how many people they had, but determine how much money they may have to invest in services going forward for people who need adaptive resources or technology.
Yeah, census. Well, I mean, the census obviously goes back to inform all sorts of things for all of our governments. Every time we fill out a census, we're really giving data to our governments to make decisions, which is really important, particularly when we think about spending money for the future and aging populations. We now have statistics around how long we're living, and also culturally there are various differences. So as our world becomes more like in Australia, we're incredibly diverse and inclusive, and culturally that's created different changes. So do we have kids living at home longer? Well, yes, we do, actually. I keep telling my children they can stay forever. I say that now, but I'm sure I'll change my mind. So it is informing all of our major decisions. So governing bodies are making decisions based on those numbers. What's really important, too, is that you don't have to tell anyone that you have a disability. So again, those numbers that we're getting through the census aren't a reflection of the community, unfortunately. It gives us a little snippet, but we know that it's the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Now, you've told me something before that I find interesting about Australia and its approach to not just accessibility, but pretty much any issue, and that is y'all are nowhere near as litigious as we are here in the United States. And as a grandson of a carnival owner, I appreciate that a lot because, in my family, we grew up avoiding lawsuits and lawyers. Even now, I'm very reluctant to use the regulatory apparatus to encourage companies to change. I generally want to have conversations rather than work at compliance with them. And you were telling me that Australia has just a totally different take on how this all works.
Yeah. So look, we are a much less litigious society in Australia. It doesn't mean we don't get lawsuits, but the mediated approach is much more common. So we do know that we've had a couple of lawsuits that have gone all the way to Supreme Court, but literally a couple in the last 25 years. So the approach then as an advocate, as a professional in this industry is how then, if you don't have the stick to beat them with, how then do you get people to care? And so much of that is about the way that we talk about accessibility. So instead of threatening, I think risk assessments are really important. And there are certain industries, even within Australia, regardless of our lack of that sort of litigious society, we still go, hey, this is a risk. And no one loves to sue anyone more than they love to sue governments and banks. So, you probably want to get on top of that. There are certain agencies where you go, insurance companies, for example. So there certainly is a risk assessment to be done, but I never lead with that because the risk in Australia is so different because culturally we're so different. It's not that we don't have the laws to back it up. It certainly sits under our Disability Discrimination Act of 1992. We've just in April released new guidance about how to provide services and goods in the sense of digital accessibility to avoid litigation. So we certainly have a bit of that, but it's not the same attitude. And so that means that my approach as a professional, as an advocate, as someone who cares, is to try and find how do I approach, especially the big organizations, but even the small ones, how do I approach digital accessibility as something that they need to do? And for me, it's about the carrot. Now, there are three main reasons why people generally, in my experience, do digital accessibility. One is, that sort of bad PR, legal lawsuit, sort of risky reason. That is the least reason I actually see in Australia as to why someone is, inquiring or doing something about accessibility. The other two reasons are much more common. So the first one is that it's the right thing to do. Like, this is about human rights, it's about dignity, it's about respect, it's about ensuring that your end user has access. I have never once met a malicious CEO or developer or UXer. It's generally that they didn't know, or they didn't know how to prioritize, or they thought it was too hard because no one had ever walked them through accessibility and what it means or how to do it. So in general, people want to do the right thing. But we also recognize that in a business, wanting to do the right thing and all of the other competing priorities also, they mix and mesh, and sometimes accessibility gets pushed down. Unfortunately, more often than not, it gets pushed down. So you need another lever to push. You can't just push on the, I guess, having empathy and putting someone in someone else's shoes. I talk to really large audiences sometimes. So if there's 1,000 people in the room, not everyone is going to have the same, I call it the light bulb moment, where they go, oh, yes, of course. So we have to find different levers. So the lever that works the best, in my experience, is the 1 in 5 is the tip of the iceberg. How many more people are going to benefit or want to use your product or stay longer on that website or buy more of your things or use your services if you're doing things that, even if they don't know, that are making it easier? We know that more accessible websites, the more accessible the website, the easier it is to use in general, right?
Yeah,
we
exactly.
know that when we build for accessibility, we build better, more inclusive websites as a whole. And someone might not have the words to put that to them, but it makes for a better experience, meaning you want to come back, you want to spend longer on that website or in that document. Great example of that is movement on pages, when we have too much movement on a page. So if you have a carousel that's just flinging by, for a screen reader user, that's horrific. That is a terrible experience. No one wants to hear their screen reader on a carousel that's flipping through a bunch of title slides, right? It's terrible. It's a terrible experience. It is also a terrible experience for someone who has ADHD and they're trying to read content on the page and their eyes keep getting drawn up to the moving carousel, or someone who has dyslexia who has to concentrate and the cognitive load is much harder for them to read, and there's this flashing thing that just keeps moving above the content they're trying to read. Or me, who I just get annoyed when something's moving because I'm trying to do something else. It's just distracting. And so all we have to do in order to put some controls around it, add a pause button so that I'm not hearing that or seeing that all of the time moving. And those are the things that make the biggest impact.
Right. Or change the carousel to where the default is at the stop position and only the people who want it to move can make it move. You could.
Under user control are the words that we use at W3C for this. Under user control.
Yeah. I was recently surprised because for the longest time I was telling people that GIFs were not accessible, and I was focused mainly on screen readers, but somebody pointed out to me that movement can cause problems for people with diseases like epilepsy or PTSD. And then I noticed recently that there's now a select button where if you use a GIF, you can select it to stop or to move automatically when it opens. But the one that affects my life the most is when somebody even now will have a website launch with audio playing or video playing, and the volume level is so high that I cannot hear my screen reader to turn it off.
Yeah, I can't believe we're still having that problem in 2025. Oh, that's so frustrating. Look, to be fair, I think we're seeing less of it. That was certainly a major issue for a long period of time there. But the fact that we're even still seeing that means that there's still a lot of education. And when we educate, I don't know about you. I've got 3 children, and I can yell at them, but I'm not going to get the same response as if I talk to them calmly and I tell them why I don't want them to do something. So if we treat accessibility in the same way, if we sit down with that dev team, those UXers, that product owner, and we go, listen, here's the thing. not that you can't do, but you might have to consider a little differently, maybe do a little differently. And here's why. Then you're going to get a much better response than you have to or you'll get sued.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the expressions I've been using ever since I started many years ago was that I would rather answer an awkward question than to make people guess. So,
Absolutely.
so I agree with you. We have so many opportunities during the course of a day to educate, whether that's somebody you know who asks you a casual question in a conversation, or a business owner, or as you mentioned, you're speaking to 500 or 1,000 people at an event. We have, or when you're writing for a publication, I know like myself, you also have written for several publications where you share this. So it is, we have all these opportunities to educate, and we really have to hold up our responsibility along with the developers in order to get to the point where we avoid the overwhelm and the misunderstandings, and people will actually start taking steps towards more inclusive design.
I think part of it is that idea that when we have so much information, so when you're an expert in something, and I certainly, over time, I've grown and matured, but when I first came into accessibility, it was very much, I was so passionate about it. I just wanted everything to be like perfect to standard. And perfect doesn't exist, despite my tendency to like perfection. It's an issue. I know that. But perfect doesn't exist. So it's actually about building these bridges with people to take them on the journey and recognize that and have them say that's okay too. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and be perfectly accessible. In fact, the whole point of this is that you learn, you apply what you've learned, and you go back and you learn some more. We cannot be expecting entire digital teams to become experts in digital accessibility. They have their own level of expertise, and that's really good. What we do need them to do is to be aware. They need to know who to go to, who is the expert, and they need to have some knowledge. And that knowledge may be fairly basic, but I shouldn't, there's no need for me to be telling every content creator what a sensible heading is, right? It's really important that they are educated that that's programmatically a heading so that a screen reader or voice technology knows that's a heading. But really, I don't need to tell them how to write content. That's not my job. They should be able to know, here's a heading. It looks like a heading. It needs to programmatically be a heading, and be able to move on from there. Bring me the complex problems. I want that. But the everyday stuff, if we upskill people and make accessibility a little bit part of their job and stop expecting them to be experts in it, then we're going to get a lot further, and we'll have a lot more people who want to do accessibility instead of kind of having it tacked onto a job.
Yeah, that is part of the issue. In many companies, it's another task added on to somebody who's already got a pretty full plate. You mentioned headings. I agree with you. I don't feel like I have to tell people about headings, but I do feel like I have to tell them about heading structure and consistency, because most people don't realize that with screen readers and some of the adaptive tech, headings are their friends that allow people like me to navigate larger amounts of information in shorter periods of time. So, but I do find that people are pretty good about using headings, but using headings that make sense, that are that are nested properly, that's a whole other thing.
Well, I certainly tell my clients, don't be cute with headings. There is no need to be cute with your headings. Make sure they make sense, and as best you can, keep the hierarchy. So that you know what's happening on that page. It's a little harder now on the web, not in documents, but on the web, where you have dynamic content and the way that websites are built today, kind of piecing together blocks. It's important to recognize that you may find that you skip from a heading level 1 to an H3 just because that particular component on that particular page always renders as an H3, a heading level 3 instead of a heading level 2. And the way that page is built is a little bit like building Lego. But I think that if we are putting in headings in the right place and they make sense, then it just makes such a difference.
Right, right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking with Amanda Mace, and she is the Vice President for Australasia for Grackle Docs. She is a subject matter expert on digital accessibility with over 13 years of experience. She is a professional accessibility expert. She's certified through the Australian Computer Society, and she also is very active in many of their professional organizations, as well as a regular writer and speaker on the subject of digital accessibility. And you can find her at grackledocs.com. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the evolution of Grackle, and because now it seems like it does so much more than it did in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So Grackle Docs started out as a software company that created an add-on for Google Docs, slides, and sheets to check for accessibility and then produce an accessible output. So for slides and docs, that would be like a PDF that was PDF UA compliant. So that's PDF universal accessibility. So ensuring that we're meeting the technical specifications for an accessible PDF, meaning the technology can read the technology. If it's done well, it should. Just like HTML, that's why we try to tell people to validate their HTML and not give assistive technology or user agents alphabet soup to try and figure out. Let's give them good technology to work with and understand. So they started out with that, and then basically expanded into document remediation. So we have an entire remediation team that go and remediate documents to the PDF UA specification, which is, they're a great team. They're incredibly knowledgeable. It's incredibly technical work. And I'm in awe of my team that do that work. I'm so proud to work with them. I've learned so much. I literally, before I joined Grackle Docs, I actually co-authored a book chapter in a textbook about document accessibility. I thought I knew document accessibility, and then I met some of the people on my team now, and let me tell you, the Grackle Docs team knows document accessibility in a way I never thought. Real experts in that area. We also have a consulting and training. And then we have the other team, which I manage, which is the audit team. So that audit team goes through and does WCAG manual audits, not automated, manual audits, to ensure that, well, not just websites. Now we do native apps, and we do software, and native apps for mobile, software, websites, web applications, you name it, we will test it. We have done documents from a design point of view. So kind of one of the challenges that we always have when we talk about standards is that there are different types of standards and guidelines, and they are not all equal. So you have the web content accessibility guidelines, which are guidelines and very outcome based. And then you have technical specifications like PDF UA, which is really more, it's a technical specification. It's how to make that document from a technical point of view be accessible. So it will tell you how to essentially, for lack of a better term, code that link or code that figure in order to make sure the assistive technology knows what to do with it and gives context. Whereas WCAG will just tell you that that figure, if it's informative, needs to have alt text that makes sense and is equivalent. So there are like some differences there. So my audit team, of which I am incredibly proud of, does all of the manual audits. So we really, I don't know that I love this phrase, but we're a one-stop shop for digital accessibility at Grackle Docs, and I'm really lucky to be part of the team.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the PDF accessibility, because I don't think people really realize just how important PDFs are to being included in the world that we live in, because PDFs are used to generate slides, they're used to generate contracts, they're generally used in onboarding documents for people who have just been hired at a company that they may have to work their way through in order to be successful in that new company. The PDFs and being able to access these documents using adaptive technology is a huge part of life, isn't it?
Absolutely. So there's something like 1 billion PDFs are uploaded to the internet every year. So and I work in an industry where there are certainly people who will say PDFs are too hard to make accessible and everything should be a web page. Well, I call rubbish on that. Not everything should be a web page. It's not practical and it's just not happening. And also, it wouldn't be good user experience, which ultimately is what we're after, right? Great user experience. Certainly, not everything needs to be a document either. There are plenty of people who are making documents that do not need to be PDFs. We know that. We're aware of that. It is just as difficult. And we know this because the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the very first version of them, 1.0, was released in 1999. When was the last time you saw a really accessible website? They're pretty rare, right? How many conformant websites do we run across? So the truth is that even though we say web can be perfectly accessible, well, sort of, kind of, but it's not happening because it's technical and you need experts to do it. And so we don't get perfect conformance in websites. And that's true for documents too. The challenge we have with documents is there is a lot less education about it. People don't realize they can be accessible, or they think it's too hard, when in fact, it's sort of the same kind of thing. The concepts are across the board. We spoke about headings earlier. Well, headings in documents, very much similar to headings on the web. You need to have them and they need to be programmatically defined. They need to make sense to help understand the structure of the document. And ultimately, if we ignore document accessibility, we're leaving people out. That's what's happening, because document accessibility it's a necessity. We rely on PDFs all the time. Like you said, onboarding, hiring, contracts, you name it, we're making it. And in fact, it's a lot easier to make a document than it is to make a web page. Your average person is not making a new website, right? Your average person, though, will save as PDF 100 times this week.
Yeah. I would say the average, I would agree with you, because anytime I talk about building my own websites in a podcast interview as the guest, hosts are like, I'm glad I never had to do that, So I would agree with you that there are a lot more PDFs being created, and it does sound like the technical challenges are probably a little stricter, maybe a little harder for people to understand. But then that's why there are companies out there who can help with that, and experts that can help with that. Now, you mentioned something that y'all do that I haven't run across too many people who do this. So I think you're the perfect person to answer my next question. Most people and companies that I talk to in the digital accessibility space, they do not do both websites and mobile apps. So could you talk a little bit about the different challenges of creating an accessible experience on the different type platforms?
Yeah, so it's exactly the challenges you can imagine. One is WCAG is made for web, right? So the standard that everyone is aware of is WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So I call them WCAG because you don't want me to say Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 100 times in any interview. But with WCAG, it's specific for web. So there's actually an advisory note that has been put out by like a group note from the W3C with how to apply WCAG to ICT, to non-web technologies. So we utilize that. So basically what that means is we go through each of those success criteria, and as we go through them, we go, how can this be applied? Now, the challenges that we come across is some of the success criteria can't currently be applied to that technology. Now, that might be software or mobile apps, so it can't be. But the other challenge is that depending on whether it's an Apple or an Android, we have different types of operating systems that react in very different ways. They have different code sets. So sometimes we'll have something that works really well in an Android phone, will be incredibly poor in an Apple phone, in an iPhone. So we do have challenges with both. And of course, people are using more and more of these native apps being built as a supplement from a functionality point of view to their services and products that they're selling on their website. So we have to approach them a little bit differently. You have to approach them you can't drop in. So in terms of the user journey, You don't drop into a specific page in a mobile app normally, like a screen. You start the screen and then you have to always follow a journey with a mobile app, almost always. There may be some small exceptions to that, but generally you're opening the app and then you have to go through the journey. That's not true with websites. You have a specific URL and you can go directly to a specific page, and you don't have to journey your way through that website to get to a particular page. So you have multiple ways of getting to a page on a website. A screen on a mobile app, generally that's not true. You're not dropping in from like nowhere. And so there are some challenges, but it's also a really exciting time because we're continuing to build out. There's a lot of guidance out there. And what's really exciting for my team is that we sit and we have full-on debates about whether this thing is can we technically fail that, or is that an operating system problem? Is Android just not handling that well? Talkback doesn't work with this, but there are challenges with it. The other challenge we find is there isn't a lot of testing tools available to help find issues. So we often don't have access to the code, whereas in HTML, you can right-click and inspect the source code, and you know exactly what you're looking at. You can't do that in mobile apps. So
please promise to never inspect any of my source code, okay?
I promise not to. Promise not to.
Yeah, but so I had never thought about it that way before. I just knew that there are certain things that I use in my everyday life that play nice with my desktop or laptop, and some that only work nice with iOS. But now that you're explaining it, that does make perfect sense. When you use an app, you only enter it through the open, and you can only then go to whatever options are displayed on that opening screen.
It's just a different user journey. And I think we have to, part of this is acknowledging the experience that we each take when we're doing anything. That experience is going to be different based on the type of asset that we're looking at. So what we try to do from an audit team perspective is get a sense from the client as well, because no one knows their product better than that client. So from the client as well, but as an end user, if I'm picking up this app or I'm picking up this website, where am I going? What does it look like? How do I navigate? And then try and build out our user journeys from there in order to fit in as best we can with things like, so WCAG has like an evaluation methodology, which we follow from an audit perspective. And it requires that you do complete user journeys. So we make sure that we incorporate complete user journeys into all of the work that we do.
Okay. All right. That makes perfect sense. And so you have a difference in platforms, you have a difference in tools, especially automated tools that help you discover errors. And you also have a difference in what you can do to affect the user journey based on the platform that you're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell you, I talk to people all the time about how I understand how challenging their work is on the other side of the screen as a developer, but you just gave me a whole new respect for their work.
It's look, it's really good work, and in 13 years, there hasn't gone a day where I haven't learned something new, and sometimes terrifying. So here we are.
Okay, so since you besides Grackle Docs, you also lead a team of auditors. I'd love for you to touch on a couple of things with site development. I think there's three things I'd like you to address. One is content management systems like WordPress. Two is no code websites, and three is AI coding of websites, which may overlap a little with that second one.
Oh, those are big topics. All right. Well, let's start with the AI question, because frankly, that's what everyone really wants to hear is AI. AI does some pretty cool things. And I think what we need to remember, we need to not be scared of the technology. It's really important that we embrace it, but use it ethically and be smart about it. And remember that ultimately, as humans, we have the best knowledge about whether another human is going to be able to utilize and do this thing that we want it to do. So we will see more and more AI building out code. That is the reality. There is no doubt about it. What we need to do is make sure that people have the fundamentals of code to really understand what it's writing and be able to correct it where it's not right. Because at the end of the day, AI only knows what we tell it, right? So we can feed it rubbish, and no doubt we do, or we can feed it really good stuff. So we can correct AI and we can correct the response. So it's going to continue to get better if we do that in an ethical way. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I am not scared of technology. I'm not scared of AI. I think that we need to embrace it, but in a really healthy way. And remember that it's not human. That's the most important part. In terms of CMSs, look, some of them are getting much better and some of them not so much. If I were giving advice to a client and they were looking at a new CMS, I would always advise get one where you have some control. Because when we have sort of, these ones where they're out of the box and you just get to click and drag things into place, the challenge you're always going to have with that is if you don't have access directly to the source code, if they haven't coded it right on their end, completely out of your control, then you're at their mercy. And whether their knowledge is good enough. So you always want to be the person in control of that. So ensuring that you have a CMS that you have control over, you don't want to have to hard code everything. No one's going to hard code everything, but making sure that you have good processes in place, you have access to the back end so that you can make adjustments where needed and build yourself, depending on how you work, how big you are, especially our big organizations, build yourself a really accessible library, a patterns library, a coding library, be able to copy and paste great components that you've pre-built into your website, into your CMS.
Right. I have been a WordPress user for a long time. I'm still impressed with their dedication to accessibility. I'm just not so much impressed on their delivery of accessibility anymore, especially on the back end. And I think you just helped me understand why I've kind of soured on them. Is since the institutions of Gutenberg and the block editor, I don't have the same control that I used to have over my back end, over my website.
And this is the thing. I think WordPress, it accounts for, I can't remember the percentage, but it accounts for like the majority of the websites in the world. And they do a really great job. They do a lot of advocacy. I think WordPress Accessibility Day was either very recently or is coming up very soon. I should know that date by heart and I don't. But they do a really good job in some areas. We have to acknowledge too that especially something like WordPress, as big as they are, is that they're also growing at rates. So it's a journey for them as well. And then it's not necessarily the stuff coming out of the box. So we work with a lot of LMSs currently. We have a lot of clients who are learning management system clients. And what they deliver out of the box could be perfect. The minute it's in the hands of someone else, it gets broken, right? And I'm not saying it is perfect. We do have a couple that do a really great job. If you want some advice on LMSs that do great jobs, I've got recommendations. But the truth is that they're on a journey too. And every time they have a release, every time they push a new update, they're doing their own regression testing. They're doing their own accessibility testing. And maybe if you're really lucky, they're bringing in like a Grackle Docs for us to do some testing. We've got a couple of clients, every year they get an audit and they're doing testing in between that internally. But every year they have someone outside like us come in and audit their LMS or their CMS, and to make sure that what they're delivering out of the box is as accessible as possible. It doesn't mean it's always perfect. Of course not. There are always going to be exceptions or really old antique code. They haven't been able to replace that thing. It would take too much time, or they're in the middle of replacing it. So there's always all of those things. And I think that we need to remember that, well, we as users are on a journey. So are the companies who are trying to, and not everyone's trying to do the right thing, but the ones that are, they're trying. So it's important to reach out. And this goes back to how we approach accessibility. It's important to reach out and be like, hey, I noticed this thing. I really think you need to look into it. And if they don't do anything, well, then that's different. If they're not willing to help, if they can't see the human side of that. But ultimately, my experience is that most people are not malicious in their intent, and they really just didn't know.
No, I would tend to agree with you, and I would say that most of my issues with WordPress have to do with the tools on the back end as opposed to the content that's being created, and that's a whole nother discussion we could have over.
Sure.
I mean, because there are so many companies out there nowadays who, if I want to use their product as an end user on the front end, say, for example, using somebody's scheduling app or using somebody's form that they've created, I won't have any problems at all. But if I want to go on the back end and create my own calendar or my own form, then I may have issues. And so that's something, like I said, that's a much bigger subject for another time. But I think you hit it on the head. It's control over your website and your content, and how and what you're comfortable with as far as building your content going forward. So uh, I have had days where I've thought, I really didn't like having to know HTML, but it wasn't as confusing as this.
Well, and this is it. It comes back to user control, right? I want all the tools to make it easier. But ultimately, if I want to change that heading tag, you better let me change the heading tag.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So we've talked about AI and CMS, which are the website building apps outside of CMS like Wix and GoDaddy, are they getting better at helping their users create accessible content?
So my experience so far is no,
Okay.
but I am willing to be corrected on that. So if someone is listening from Wix or GoDaddy, reach out. I'm happy to be corrected. So far, I have not seen an improvement, but again, happy to be corrected on that.
Yes, and we always have to remember, like you were saying, out of the box, they may have built a really good system, and those of us using their system are just not using it the way it was intended to be used to get accessible content. So,
Yeah. Well, to be fair, Max, that's always true, though. And
oh yes,
so I don't want to get everyone off the hook here. The truth is that that's always going to be true. People will use your product in weird and wonderful ways you've never thought about. So this is why we should be coding really well with the future in mind to best practice all of the time. I think the challenge that we often have with things like the back end of, a CMS or something like that, the biggest challenge we have is that people think about, well, I'm thinking about my client or my customer. They're not thinking about the experience internally. And that's a real challenge we have. We often go into clients and they say that our focus primarily is on, our customers, it's whatever's customer facing, not the internal stuff, which then leaves out an entire cohort of people internally who are doing the work for them and now have no access.
yes. So, well, look, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today to talk about accessibility. I love your message that it's a shared responsibility, that ultimately we are all somewhat responsible for whether or not the web is accessible and at the same time usable, because as we both agree, better accessibility usually leads to better user experiences. So as somebody who works with people all the time to help them improve accessibility, what is like one or two things you'd like to leave people with today? Maybe especially for those who are still wondering if they need to do accessibility or how they even get started.
Yeah, so getting started is almost the easy part. So you can reach out to amazing people like you, Max, or to myself. There's so many great people who are doing good things for accessibility. In all honesty, check out. I know it seems so simple, but check out WCAG. Their understanding documentation. There's some really good things out there on the advocacy website to understand accessibility. There are videos. There are free courses available. Reach out. A Google search will help to start somewhere. Follow groups like, in Australia, we have the Australian Web Accessibility Initiative, or Aussie Way, the Perth Digital Accessibility Group. We have all of these wonderful groups that are doing really great advocacy work. Follow one of them on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Instagram, and take the opportunities that they offer, free webinars, podcasts like this, to learn a little bit more, to understand a little bit more. So that's where to start. Reach out, find your people, We love meetup groups. They're all over America. There are free meetup groups to go and listen to someone talk about accessibility. Join them. Those are the types of things I'd say to start. In terms of a lasting message, it's really, I once had a client, and I actually relay this story quite frequently. I once had a client where I walked into the web squad and they were all wearing the same t-shirt. So they had the company logo on the front, and on the back it said, creating amazing customer experiences. And I love that. They had a motto, creating amazing customer experiences. The entire web squad had these t-shirts. Define what amazing is. Amazing is accessible in my word. So that's my takeaway message. Define what amazing is. And I challenge you to leave out accessibility because you can't.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. We've had a great time today. So for those of y'all, I've been speaking with Amanda Mace, and you can find her and learn more about what Grackle Docs does at grackledocs.com. She is a subject matter expert on digital accessibility, so you might want to check out some of the things that she's written out there, or if you get an opportunity to hear her speak, I highly encourage you to do that. Again, it's grackledocs.com. I am the blind blogger Maxwell Ivy. My website is theaccessibilityadvantage.com. My email is maxwell@theaccessibilityadvantage.com. And on LinkedIn, my primary social media is Maxwell Ivy, I-V-E-Y. I do want to see more people leverage the power of the disability community, both as a consumer group, but also because when you improve accessibility, you improve the user experience for everybody else. And if you would like some help with that, you can reach out to me on the website. I am available to write, speak, consult, or podcast. Perhaps your organization has desired to start a podcast or wants to be a regular guest on it. So I hope to hear from some of y'all soon. Theaccessibilityadvantage.com. And I do know you have lots of opportunities to spend your time on. I appreciate you spending some of it with me and Amanda today. I hope that you'll join me again next time. So, accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone, online as well as in person.
Item chooser menu. One item end stream button. End stream button. End the stream. And 5 out set not yet. End stream button. Stream.